So the history of theater starts with Greek and Roman. The Greeks were the first to write plays for the stage around 6th century BCE, started to actually produce their plays around 8th century. In the region of ancient Greece, the chorus was a big part of the plays in this time, used in many ways as the group character, setting the mood or tone, narrator, and the ideal spectator. Playwrights of this time were Sophocles, who wrote Oedipus the King and Antigone, Aeschylus, Euripides, Aristophanes, and Menander. Around this time, they introduced a third character and wrote plays in the form of satire, comedy, and tragedy. The Romans borrowed a lot from Greek theater, introducing structures and plots of plays, however, did not value the chorus and drama, as well as eliminating comedy altogether. The Romans, the dramas of ancient Rome were written based off the Greek dramas. Those were produced in 240 BCE. Plays were driven from the theater by other forms of entertainment like mimes, and the arena. Playwrights of this time were Plautus and Terence. They wrote comedies like Pseudolus and Seneca, who wrote tragedies, probably not for production. Roman drama would become influential during the Renaissance. And then you have the medieval theater, which is the next period. All of the medieval plays were influenced through the church. A kind of international Western drama developed during this period. Plays were written anonymously because writing for the glory of God precluded taking individual credit for work. Instead of writing plays, they mostly adapted biblical studies. A playwright of this time was Herospitha, the first female dramatist, and along with many other anonymous writers. This period ended in the 16th century because rulers wanted to avoid religious conflicts, which led to the Renaissance plays having no religious ties other than in Spain. Then you have the Renaissance. This is known as the Golden Age of theater, short-lived in the 16th century in England and Italy, focused more on quantity over quality of plays. Major playwrights of this time were Shakespeare, who wrote Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer's Night's Dream, Othello, and Henry IV, parts 1 and 2. You have Christopher Marlowe, who wrote Dr. Faustus, The Jew of Malta, Edward III. And then you have Lope de Vega, Calderon de la Barca, and Thomas Kidd, who wrote the Spanish tragedy. The development of the printing press was a huge part of the Renaissance theater. Also, forms of plays like autos, sacramentales, comedias, capae, espades, and such as Laus and Intermessus. The Renaissance led to William Shakespeare becoming one of the greatest playwrights of all time. In some aspects of the Renaissance theater was used in the Italian and French neoclassicism, which leads us to neoclassicism. Birthed in Italy but moved to France, neoclassicism drama was based on a verisimilitude and decorum, 3 genres, 3 utilities, a 5-act form, and a 2-fold purpose. Neoclassical plays were divided up into 3 types: tragedy, comedy, and pastora. Playwrights of this time were Aristotle, who wrote Poetics, Pierre Corneille, Molière, who wrote Tartuffe, Les Misanthropes, and then you have Victor Hugo, who wrote Hernani. Towards the end of the neoclassical era, they decided also entertaining with plays was acceptable, but it should entertain and teach. English Restoration followed a lot of neoclassicism in Shakespeare, which leads us to English Restoration. In 1600 through 18th century in England got its name because of the line King Charles to the throne after 20 years of Puritan control. Women were allowed into the theater for the first time, which led to new aspects such as rape and women dressing as men. The time period was post-William Shakespeare. Your playwrights were William Wycherley and William Congreve. The genre of romanticism led to the development of melodrama, which leads us to melodrama. Melodrama, meaning music drama, developed as a form of escapism from the social ills that grew out of the Industrial Revolution. Including poor working and living conditions, the plays presented a 2D stock characters, including a villain, hero, and heroine, which with strict poetic justice. The evil were punished and the good were rewarded. All those plays had a happy ending. A playwright of this time was Gilbert de Pexericourt in France. That's not how you say it, but. And then you have Dion Boycott in Ireland and then America. These were the two most prominent writers of the melodrama during the 19th century. A big development of the time were special effects. The same society conditions which led to melodrama also led to realism. Realism, during the latter half of the 19th century, various social movements, theories, and philosophies contributed to realism's development. Charles Darwin's theories of evolution, survival of the fittest, and heredity versus environmental influences on humans, Comte's advocations of the scientific study of human, social relations, sociology, all influenced realistic drama. The establishment of well-made plays was established by Ibsen. Your playwrights of the time were Anton Chekhov, who wrote The Cherry Orchard, George Bernard Shaw, and August Strindberg, who wrote Miss Julie. This gets us into the other isms. You have symbolism, which began in 1885, emphasized the use of symbols to approximate their semblance of the truth. Symbolist playwrights set their plays in the past or in world of fantasy. Expressionism emerged in 1910 in Germany. Instead of cause to effect linear narratives, these plays were message-centered with generic stereotyped characters, and telegraphic dialogue. Fantasy and magic were embraced, and the overall effect was that allegory clothed in nightmare. This movement had been longer lasting than many of the anti-realistic movements due to its emphasis on text, as well as the contributions of some significant playwrights such as George Kaiser, Ernst Toller, Eugene O'Neill, Elmer Rice, and Sophie Treadwell. And then you have Dadaism and Futurism, which were formed in the 20th century through radical in some of their ideas, proved less immediately influential. This was due partly to the rather unspecific nature of their ideas and forms. And now you get into the absurdist. It's a post-World War II designation for the particular plays of absurdist fiction written by a number of primarily European playwrights in the late 1950s, as well as some of their style of theater, which has evolved from their work. Their work focused largely on the idea of existentialism and expressed what happens when humans exist has no meaning or purpose, and therefore all communication breaks down. Logical construction and argument gives way to irrational and illogical speech, and to its ultimate conclusion, silence. Which leads us into our last time period, which is postmodern. Developed in the late 20th century, one hallmark of the postmodern plays is the de-emphasis on the text. These plays match the absurdist view of having no logical view. One of your major playwrights at the time was Heiner Müller, who wrote The Hamlet Machine. Postmodern works were far from meaningless. Instead, they often opened up multiple meanings through their rejection of the more mainstream traditional form of realism. Most importantly, postmodernism developed a shift away from a widely shared cultural and intellectual assumption about objectively truth, meaning, progress, and identity.